Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Beth Ann, and today I want to talk about The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan, which I listened to on audiobook. It's a very long audiobook. It was, I think, over 24 hours, which some parts of the year I can get through that pretty quickly when I have to do a lot more driving for work. But I started it in mid-September, and I just finished it a week ago, so November 5th. So it took me a while to get through, but it was really, really excellent. And I think the audiobook was well done. The narrator was quite good. It didn't have any real kind of special effects, sounds or things like a lot of other audiobooks do these days. But it was quite well read. So I did enjoy this book quite a bit. Just to get that out of the way, I think I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. With audiobooks, it's always a little bit hard for me to tell if part of my enjoyment of the book was due to the narrator. So just with that caveat, it wouldn't surprise me if I were to read it in print if I actually didn't think it was a 5-star book. But especially with that audio experience of having somebody really talented read it to me. I really loved this book. So for those who aren't aware, The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan is designed to be a very broad view, shallow in the detail overview of the entire history of the Middle East and Central Asia, from antiquity, before antiquity, several thousand years ago, up to the present. And the book did come out in 2015. So a lot of the events talked about at the end of the book are very contemporary, things like the 2001 attacks on the Trade Center and things that have come since. But it doesn't get quite up to 2020. So it does end in 2015. And the reason that I picked this book up was because I was very interested in some of the more ancient history of Central Asia. And the book does do that for, I would say, about half of the book. I would call it kind of quite old history, going up through the Crusades, into kind of the rise of Europe as a global power. And then the second half of the book is essentially kind of what's happened to that region once Europe became a global power. And for me, it was a really interesting and helpful lens, because Frankopan's goal is to try to center Central Asia as a key player throughout our history, and especially the education that I got growing up. It wasn't presented that way. We're told this narrative of, first there were the ancient Greeks and the Romans, and okay, sure, maybe before that there was stuff happening in Mesopotamia, but the Greeks and Romans were the rise of culture, and then Western Europe is the inheritors of that culture. And that's not, some parts of that are just actually not true. They ignore a whole lot of other history that was happening. And so my reason for picking up this book was to learn about some of that other history. And so Peter Frankopan goes into a great survey of what was happening in the Middle East and Central Asia before Greek and Roman times, how the Greeks and Romans actually really borrowed from some of those earlier cultures. And then as the Greeks and Romans declined, Middle East and Central Asia were growing in cultural, economic power and reputation. And then we have Western Europe rising as a power only in the past few hundred years. So I really appreciated getting a lot more of that early history. Those parts of the book were fantastically well written. He does a really great job of pulling thematic elements that apply across the entire region. And so you'll hear, in one chapter, kind of one country or one culture will be kind of the dominant one. And, in particular, there's some trade-offs between the different religious cultures of the area, especially once we have Christianity, Islam, and Judaism kind of all vying for power. So there'll be the rise and falls of those over different periods. And then the rise and fall of different Central Asian countries and city-states. And so he's kind of weaving higher order themes about globalization and economic power as you see these players kind of come and go. So I thought that was really well done. And his main point through kind of those chapters is just to emphasize that globalization already existed even 2,000-3,000 years ago. These huge networks of global trade operating across the Silk Roads through Central Asia already existed. And one thing that was cool to me was that a lot of the way people study that is by looking at ancient coins that are found in different places. And they would find tons and tons of different types of ancient coins from 3,000 years ago, showing that global trade spanned thousands and thousands of miles. So that first part of the book, really what it really made me want to do, which is kind of what I was hoping for, was identify particular pieces that are really interesting to me. So I got a broad survey, and now I can use that to kind of drill down and identify where I want to go read further. So in particular, I'd like to read more about the specific history of Samarkand, which was a city-state at various points, was incredibly wealthy and powerful at various points, and then a backwater at various points. So I'd really like to read more about that particular city. And then there was a group of people, a community called the Sogdians, I think if I'm getting that right, which I believe was a Jewish community that kind of operated as like long distance traders, bankers, communicators across the Silk Roads. And so they were for several hundred years the main people that were really pushing goods and services along the Silk Roads and kind of spreading all of this wealth and maintaining those global trade networks. And so I'd like to read a little bit more about that. And then one other interesting thing to me was, as he got a little bit more towards the modern day, he was talking about the beginning of kind of Russia as we know it in modern history, which partly began from the small country of Rus was kind of the catalyst point for the creation of Russia. And Rus was founded, at least partly, by Vikings coming over from Northern Europe. And so that's where you get some of that look, the blonde hair, blue eyes. And they were horrible. They were slavers, but played an important, well, I shouldn't say but, they were horrible. They were slavers, period. They did then play an important role in increasing trade between that particular region of Europe/Asia. And at that point, Central Asia, which was much more economically developed. So I'd like to read a little bit more about that history too. So I thought all that was great. And then the second part of the book, really, as we move more into the modern era, again, had that very survey style, focused a lot on what was happening in terms of economics and global trade. So he gets, for example, a lot into the oil industry, which of course has dominated global trade for several hundred years now. That part of the book was a bit depressing because he's I think pretty honest and upfront about the role that Great Britain and then the US really played in, I want to say a bad word here, in royally messing everything up. And just, he kind of doesn't really pull many punches when it comes to being very honest about the imperialism that was happening and is still happening with oil trade in the Middle East. So yes, that was depressing. It was also very important for me to read because that it's not a huge area of interest for me. So I get what I get from the news, which is a problem. And so this very descriptive survey style, kind of identifying the key players, but focusing on really these global relationships, was really accessible to me. So, yeah, with all that said, I loved this book. One thing I've learned from watching some other BookTube reviews is that the hard copy has maps in it, which I really wish I'd had. I did try to look stuff up as I was reading it, but I'm just not familiar with the geography of Central Asia. And having those maps to flip to would have been really great. So if you are interested in reading this book, I do suggest getting the hard copy just for that reason. Maybe going back and forth between the hard copy and the audiobook because I thought the narrator was really great. So I think that's all I have to say about the Silk Roads. I will link to other BookTube videos in the description that I watched to see what other people thought. I basically agreed with them, so but they had some really well done reviews. So if you've read the Silk Roads, let me know what you thought. There's a lot to talk about in that book potentially, and I know I've heard from a few people that want to read it. So I hope my review made it sound interesting. I think it's a great book to pick up. So let me know if you're planning to read it, and maybe check back in whenever you get a chance to do so, and we can chat about it a little bit. All right, I hope you're all having a fantastic day. Thanks for watching my video. Bye.